start, thank you all for being here. My name is Natalia Bisuera, and I'm the chair of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. I'm also a professor in the Departments of Spanish and Portuguese and Film and Media. And it's really a great honor to be introducing myself, Blackmore, who I first met years ago when I invited Lisa to collaborate on a project on photography. Now probably like, what, 7 years ago? Something like that. Oh my god, time passes. Because I have been really following Lisa's work in relationship to both architecture and the visual field in Venezuela. And as the kind of amazing transdisciplinary scholar that Lisa is, for those of you that know her, and I said, this is amazing because I think there's a number of people in the room, maybe from the humanities, who I'm like, oh my god, we have some people here who are more into like science, which is always a beautiful possibility. And so that really thanks to Lisa and the kind of interdisciplinary work that she does. So, anyway, just a little context here. So, Lisa Blackmore is a researcher, curator, and educator working with art and water cultures in Latin America since 2018. She's been directing Entre, Ríos, a platform whose collaborative methodologies reconnect diverse communities to bodies of water through curatorial, editorial, and pedagogical projects. She's a visiting scholar currently at the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management here at UC Berkeley, and otherwise she's a senior lecturer in art history and interdisciplinary studies at the University of Essex in the UK. In 2023, she was a British Academy Mid-Career Fellow for her project Imagining the Hydrocommons, Art, Water, and Infrastructure in Latin America. And some of her most recent publications include Water in the Handbook for Latin American, or Handbook to Latin American Environmental Aesthetics, and the co-edited volume Hydrocommons, Cultures, Art, Pedagogy, and Care Practices in the Americas from this year. And after Lisa's presentation, she and I will have a brief conversation and open it up to the public. And I also just want to remind those of you who might be interested that as part of the new vocabularies, new grammars that Lisa is presenting in through the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, the presentation is followed by a morning mini seminar, and that's happening tomorrow from 10 to 12. I am not, is it at the center? Yeah, it's at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, which is on Bowditch Street. So if any of you have not signed up, you are still welcome to join. But also let me know in case you want to get more details about that, okay? So stay for the conversation, join the mini seminar tomorrow, and join me in welcoming Lisa.
Okay, thanks so much for being welcome, and thanks for coming along. Can you hear okay? Is that fine? Wonderful. So I hope people in the room have a snack. I saw some people munching fruits.
Snacks and the fruit, but
there's going to be a lot of food in what we're going to see today, especially the images, so just bear that in mind. And I'm really happy to share this presentation how to the river. This is really preliminary work, very much in progress, so it's also great to have a space to share it with you today, but that's obviously also a caveat for having you think with me. So Natalia just gave a bit of context, but also I'd just like to say a couple of things about who I am and what I'm working on here at Berkeley as a visiting scholar. So I work in the environmental humanities, find disciplinary identifications kind of difficult, but this one is quite a generous one because of the way it helps us move between practice and research. And in my case, that means working with water cultures and conflicts in Latin America and thinking with the work that artists are doing, but also thinking of material environments and infrastructures. And as Natalia said, as a curator, I'm involved in this platform. We started sort of 5-6 years ago now, ríos, between rivers, is what it means if you don't speak Spanish. And through this platform, we instigate collaborative, creative experiments, ways to try to find conversations across disciplinary divides, but across watersheds as well, and specifically focusing on making exhibitions and publications and doing workshops. And one of the places we've been working for the last few years is the Bogotá River in Colombia, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. And here I'm in close collaboration with my friends and co-curators, Diego Piñeros Garcia, Laura Giraldo Martinez, and Juliana Steiner. So also this work is very much being thought of collectively, even though I'm the person standing here today. And also through the ríos, we've been working with Alejandro Ponce León, editing this recent new journal that came out by a platform called La Escuela, which is a platform for art and pedagogy in Latin America. And this inaugural issue was looking at how artists are working with communities and how artistic practice is helping us to think about the hydrocommons, about which more very soon. And we also did for this section a map where we asked people who had initiatives working with the protection of different water bodies across the Americas to tell us what they were doing, and from that we began to make a directory of actions to start mapping this rise in water protection work, which has always been there, but there seems to be a real impetus right now around water care. So to say a few things about the kind of conceptual framework for this, the word I propose is hydrocommoning as a conceptual horizon to study emergent practices such as the ones we've been mapping and the ones I'll talk about today, considering how they reaffirm water's role as a living being and life-sustaining commons. And the use of this term departs from and is in dialogue with the work of Astrid Lehmann-Manis and her theory of the hydrocommons in her book Bodies of Water, where she recenters water as the medium that connects human and non-human lives across diverse scales and insists on the mutual dependence of all life to raise questions about the politics, ethics and aesthetics of watery coexistence. If you don't know the book, I recommend it, and it's open access. So with this conceptual framework, what I want to do is propose hydrocommoning as a way to name experiential practices across different geographies, knowledges, scales and sectors that are striving for knowledge ecologies, citizen participation and shared values that work towards healthier and more just water relations. And my claim in this work is that art has much to contribute to this transformation of how we relate to and through water. And at Berkeley, what I'm actually doing is working on the chapters for a book manuscript of the same name, which is looking at hydrocommoning practices across artworks to show how art connects us to water across vast physical scales, from our liquid cells in our bodies through to climatic phenomena, and across expansive time frames. So from the start of thinking of planetary life, through to indigenous hydrocosmologies, through to water futures that are in the making. So with that, let's start at the river that concerns us today. The Bogotá River in Colombia is born in the Páramo de Huachilequi. It surfaces as groundwater, mist and rain, pooling in lakes, then starting a 21-day journey to meet the Magdalena River, Colombia's biggest. For the Indigenous Mhuysca people, these highland lakes are the wombs of the river and of all the life it nourishes. After descending to the flat plains, the river starts its journey towards the capital city, irrigating large farms, receiving discharges of pesticides and fertilizers from intensive crop production, vegetables and strawberries, and other things, and also receiving discharges of heavy metals from leather tanneries, as well as chemicals from multiple nurseries growing flowers for export and untreated domestic sewage, lots of it. Channelized and managed by hydrocontrols, in the 30s the river reaches the 11 million strong capital Bogotá, where floodplains and wetlands have been progressively drained to make way for urban growth. The wetlands here, the few that remain, act as water filters, but these natural lungs are unable to remediate the pollution that chokes the river. Most of the city's domestic sewage and pollution from its tributaries flow untreated into it. By the time the river's left Bogotá, its water quality resembles that of an open sewer. Unable to metabolize its pollutants, it's now been labelled biologically dead. More of this soon as well. So at the start of the lower course where we are here, the black waters are a tangle of waste, letting off a pungent sulphurous smell as they snake through rural villages. On these banks here in El Charquito, villagers still tended to vegetable plots just 50 years ago. Now islands of toxic foam seep through into the land and float along through the valley until they reach Tequendama Falls. Here, this body of water, which is in itself a mass of bodily excretions, chemical pollutants and heavy metals, tumbles down this 150-meter drop. The turbulence creates oxygen that helps metabolize the waste up to a point, and as the river crashes to the base of the canyon, it takes a big breath and continues. In a few more days, its back waters will meet the muddy brown ones of the Magdalena River, and the cycle just keeps going. So in watersheds that support human settlements, collective life is expressed in the dynamic flux of metabolic ecological processes that shape hydrosocial relations. The modern transformation of rivers into infrastructures for agriculture, industry, and urbanization has engendered forms of hydrosocial metabolism where land, water, bodies, and world-making forces interpermeate and shape each other in ways that are sometimes nourishing, but also potentially unjust and toxic. Amid intense anthropic transformation, the fluctuating well-being of bodies of water, their physical health, and the nature of our relations with them are material expressions of the broader and long-term social, cultural, economic, and political forces that condition the reproduction of life. The Bogotá River watershed is one of the most populated and economically productive in Colombia, yet it's been forced to metabolic collapse. In Hospicing Modernity, Vanessa Machado de Oliveira proposes that practices of metabolic literacies are crucial to learning to live otherwise amid the breakdown of the modern projects, narratives, and imaginaries. And what's coming now are a series of images that are not directly related, and they're from our fieldwork, but because I can't talk about everything, I hope that they're telling you a story of where we work, even as I'm talking about slightly tangential things. So Machado de Oliveira recounts our experience with a community in the Peruvian Andes in this book, Hospicing Modernity, where they resist the installation of modern flushable toilets in favour of dry ones. And what she interprets in this is a commitment to, quote, composting their shit as a form of metabolic literacy, the understanding that the body, what it consumes and excretes, is a membrane of interrelation with the immediate environment, as well as the expansive scales of planetary life and ancestral bonds. Through these webs of relation across space and time, metabolic literacy is practiced through an awareness of the interdependence and the accountability, reciprocity, and care for land-body ecologies. This metabolic principle shapes the hydrocommons where life unfolds through mutual seepages, leakages, and imbrications that flow across different scales of interrelation, making cycles of ingestion, digestion, discharge, pollution, and fertilization political and ethical phenomena. Since, as Naimanis writes, just as we take our watery being from other animal, vegetable, geophysical, meteorological bodies of water on this planet, we in turn pass our water onto yet other watery bodies, some intimately close to us and others distant and dispersed. Metabolic processes, then, connect us across temporal scales, back in time, for instance, to early agricultural practices, via the cultivation of native species, onto radical changes in land use and diet catalyzed by processes of colonization, urbanization, and globalization, and toward the question of what contemporary food networks can sustain bonds of reciprocity between land-body ecologies in a country, in a planet where water cycles are becoming ever more unpredictable. The metabolic collapse of the Bogotá River is caused by the absence of precisely the infrastructures that uphold conditions of livability across different scales and sectors. Pollution accretes all the way through the watershed, producing a slow violence that has become normalized. If hydrocommoning entails engaging mindfully and responsibly in the transcorporeal exchanges between atmosphere, weather, soil, food systems, bodies, and waste management that sustains collective life, what practices can cultivate metabolic health and inspire reconnections with an alien river? This is where eating a river comes in. And today I want to offer eating as a hydrocommoning practice with important affordances for rethinking metabolic relations with the Bogotá River. So I want to think in three ways. Food as an aesthetic medium that helps us think through the politics, economics, and cultural histories of food and waste. Eating as a performative act of solidarity with an alien river, an embodied act of ingesting its abundance rather than focusing on its pollution. And eating as a curatorial form that gathers people to reflect on river protection and grassroots care practices, and that aims to engage more people in the river as a common and not a lost cause. I'll explore these ideas through the Piquete del Río Bogotá, a communal lunch we curated in 2023 to connect 16 river defenders and caretakers at the Tequendama Falls to share a menu of food grown in the river basin. And I'm going to tell you a bit about the Piquete del Río, a series of 4 meals at different points in the watershed that we've been curating this year to expand that initial network and instigate wider conversations about how to enliven connections to the river. These gatherings are part of Río Bogotá, the ongoing curatorial collaboration I mentioned briefly at the start. And the project involves connecting and disseminating the caretaking efforts of collectives to improve the well-being of the watershed's more than human community. So this is a short video of a wetland just above that point on the river where we saw that tangled waste and that dark water. It's just meters away. More about that later. The actions of these collectives include restoring highland barrens with plants that are fundamental for the water cycle, replanting cloud forests in the lower basin to regenerate soil. Others are engaged in wetland defense to stop urban encroachment. And still others run organic seed gardens with native crops that foster food sovereignty and community research into ancestral and traditional ways of eating. We identify these projects through fieldwork in the watershed developed over the past 4 years and more intensively since the start of 2023. With Diego, Laura, and Juli, we identified citizen projects at 6 points on the river, from its source in the highlands to the Tequendama Falls, precisely the sections where contamination begins and manifests most critically. Our curatorial work weaves this network in various ways, such as through art science workshops and by disseminating their work among other publics through films, workshops, publications, and exhibitions, to think about other connections to the Bogotá River as a living body of water. So food and eating are recurrent modes of gathering in this work that create spaces to think through specific questions. And the two that we're chewing over in this project are how to care for a river and how to return to the river. Cómo cuidar un río y cómo volver al río. And I say chewing over not just for the love of puns, but because this work is ongoing and I'm not only writing about it, the work itself is still unfolding. We're currently in the midst of the Piquete del Río, these communal meals that we're curating this year. We have 1 more to go in just over a week's time in Bogotá. So I mentioned this, as I said at the start, so you understand that the ideas are in process and I'm still digesting some of the experiences that, like metabolism, live in us and change over time. So before I want to get to talking about the specific acts of eating that we've been curating, I want to just give you a very brief overview of the history so you know kind of what's at stake when we're talking about this particular territory. So between 600 and 1600 AD, the Mhuysca lived in the Sabana de Bogotá, synchronizing their farming and dwelling patterns with seasonal flooding, guided by astrological transits that signaled yearly cycles of rainy and dry seasons. Agriculture was critical for subsistence, so they constructed dikes to control the river and erected raised beds, camillones, on the floodplains to grow native crops like corn, beans, and squash. They fished in artificial channels, zanjas, for endemic species like the capitan fish, and used fiber from aquatic plants like the microbes that thrive in wetlands for construction and basket work. They practice reciprocity to water bodies through pagamento, spiritual payment, devoting their largest offerings of gold and other objects to the rivers and lagoons they depended on most for fishing. These amphibious practices placed water at the centre of collective life to enable social reproduction on sustainable terms. Spanish colonization transformed this, displacing the Mhuysca into huarcos, cultivations, and initiating drainage works to found the city that has since drastically enclosed and reduced its wetlands. This process emerged alongside the expansion of private land tenure, farming and urbanization before and after independence. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, people maintained close connections to the river as a place of sublime contemplation and social gathering. But by the start of the 20th century, the river was tapped as an energy resource for Colombia's first hydroelectric plant in El Charquito, the place with the very contaminated waters and the collective that I was just showing you with the seed garden. And when the river, at this point, the early 1900s, was supplying electricity for a capital of 120,000 people, by the end of the century, Bogotá had grown to nearly 7 million, and the river was critically polluted. So from the late 90s onwards, activists started filing acciones populares. This is a legal instrument that enables citizens to protest the violation of collectively held rights. They claimed that the watershed's pollution and environmental degradation violated the right to clean water and a healthy environment, rational use of natural resources for sustainable development, and the preservation of animal and plant species. This struggle eventually led to the Tequendama del Río Bogotá, a High Court ruling passed in 2014 that attributes direct blame to inhabitants and industries for polluting the river, and indirect blame to national ministries and local institutions, such as the water and energy companies, for not controlling discharges. The ruling mandates decontamination, and so created funds and oversight bodies. It created funds and oversight bodies to direct and coordinate the task. It effectively created a new public policy for the watershed's environmental management. Actions are focused on improving wastewater infrastructure, the one you're looking at here, treating industrial waste from tanneries, and creating environmental risk evaluation mechanisms. More than a decade has passed since the sentencia, and each day on Bogotá River Day on May 12th, news reports speculate about the river's future, frequently casting its restoration as an odyssey. Bogotá still has only one major water treatment plant in the north of the city. In June 2023, we visited Salitre along with other groups working to build awareness around the plight of the river. At the start of the tour, one of the chief engineers stood before the group and held up two small plastic bottles. One light brown and full of small sediments, the other clear with just a tinge of yellow. The first, he told us, was the river as it entered the plant, and the second, the water that left it, after 8 hours of processing. The difference between them, he quipped, is $435 million. Since Salitre only treats 30% of waste, a second water treatment plant, Canoas, has been under construction since 2019, set to be the second largest in Latin America. With Canoas and Salitre, the river will be completely restored. The mayor of Bogotá enthused in 2019. In 2026, citizens will be able to use the river and sail in it when it's completely purified, purificado. Probably in 50 years, people will be even able to swim and do swimming competitions in it. At the time of writing, a completion date for Canoas remains uncertain. What's at stake for hydrosocial metabolism and hydropolitical dynamics, and the promise that Titanic water treatment works will purify the Bogotá River? By focusing on huge infrastructure and centralized oversight, existing policy perpetuates an anthropocentric ontology that continues to reduce the river to a waste conveyance channel and, at best, a blue space resource for leisure. River care is centralized in the hands of institutional and political actors who have not only proved unreliable in the task of decontamination, they also perpetuate the idea that pollution is acceptable as long as downstream treatment plants are built. This hinders metabolic literacies that understand the river as a being with its own rights and approach the watershed as a hydrocommons deserving of care from different actors. So this is the backdrop to our project, and fresh from fieldwork in early 2023, when we just met these collectives, we came up with the idea of a communal meal that would gather them together on the terrace facing the Tequendama Falls. There, the Bogotá River is especially hard to swallow, difícil de tragar, as we say in Spanish. It's also the most aesthetically sublime landscape, I think, in the entire watershed, and also the most contaminated. Today, lining the roadside, informal barbecues sell arepas and corn on the cob, and people stop there to take selfies at the cascading falls, but few stop for very long. There's a joke that one of our collaborators on the project, environmental engineer Luis Alejandro Camacho, never tires of telling in talks and on field trips. Evoking the importance of the Bogotá River watershed as a strawberry-producing hub, he jests that when people buy the traditional desserts of fruit and chantilly, they're not eating fresas con crema, but fresas con cromo, strawberries with chromium, not strawberries and cream. His dark humour reminds us that eating always implicates our bodies in metabolic exchanges that connect political, cultural and economic institutions with non-human lives and ecosystems. Toxicity is part of the Bogotá River's food networks, but in our curatorial discussions, Diego reminded us that there might be other possibilities. He unearthed these archival images of historic piquetes, these riverside meals where people gathered to feast on local produce, and we imagined a contemporary version of this overlooking the Tequendama Falls, an uncanny vision that would pay tribute to its iconic gravitas, while generating an inevitable unease at the combination of cooking and contamination. Our idea was that this performative and ritual feast would evoke spectres of former piquetes to revive the possibility that the river might again one day summon people to its banks to celebrate its abundance. So we invited anthropologist Cristina Consuegra and artist Carlos Alfonso to research, design and cook a menu for the meal. The two have collaborated over several years on research into native food cultures and biodiversity, and cooking is their medium. Together with Chris and Carlos, we returned to organic plots all along the river, retracing the trip from the Blackmore to the falls. And when we got there, to the end of the trip, they were speechless. We didn't know each other very well at that point, but Carlos approached us and in his very soft and gentle voice said, "Hey, but can you really eat here, facing the Tequendama Falls? I mean, the pollution's super intense, and you feel it. It's really inhospitable." This reaction was crucial because instead of looking away from the river, we wanted to stay with it, eating under a toxic vapor. Eating the river meant metabolizing the whole complex reality. I should just say that there wasn't a physical risk involved in this. In our intestines, there are no distinctions between outside and inside. As Cristina and Carlos have written in their book Mundos Mutuos, Mutual Worlds, eating is incorporating within us other forms of life. Eating is knowing a territory. Eating is entering into communion. Eating the Bogotá River was a way to extend hospitality to the water, seeds, plants, people and memories who make up this hydrocommons, allowing, to our depth, under the phrase by Ostrida, entire worlds to reside in our guts. This convivial spirit stemmed directly from the acts of care we'd observed in the community gardens we visited. Laura reminded us in one of our meetings how in the upper basin, they call the river living fertilizer, a generous way of understanding the organic matter that it holds within it. Carlos picked up this thread and proposed we give precedence to foods that he said are life-giving for us and give life to the river. Reflecting on the abundance of care that he had witnessed as people tended to their plots, he said, "We have to do the most we can with whatever's on hand." These ideas became the compass for a menu that placed an emphasis on the ways that water, plants, and humans feed positively into each other. Carlos and Chris began gathering recipes and ingredients from everybody we'd met along the way. These dishes mixed native species, ancestral traditions, memories, and hopes for alternative futures. There were muchas manos en la masa, many hands in the dough, as the saying goes in Spanish. And so the day came, in April 2023, and it rained. But Abuela Blanca Nieves, who is a Mhuysca elder from Suba in north of Bogotá, cleared the mist with a pagamento, offering her heart to the spirits of trees and owls, the mist and her river kin. The piquete began with a ritual metabolic act. Each diner had a totumo, which these little bowls you can see, filled with water collected a few kilometers from the river's source where it still runs clear. Carlos invited them to pour the water into their hands, a gift from the páramo, and let it seep into their skin. Cristina recited the text on the menu. Downstream, fresh water from the source flows into you. With you united here, the regeneration of the watershed flows upstream, reaffirming the aim of the gathering, which was to forge bonds between the river stewards we were uniting. As I narrated the menu dish by dish, we served the spread that led diners from the river's source to the waterfall below us, making a map with ingredients and recipes. The caldo del río, the broth made of trout, tubers and nettle, evoked the tradition of riverside sancochos, cooked in cauldrons on wood fires beside rivers. Banana leaf wrapped tamales, made with rabbits raised just up the hill and herbs foraged from the páramo, paid tribute to traditional fare from the Piquetes. Don Efrain Pedraza showed everybody how to eat the warm potato and peas, sucking the green spheres straight from their pods, as he had done when he was a young boy up in the hills of Villapinzón. Fermented chicha and masato arrived from the Mhuysca Council in Sicilien and with Abuela Blancanieves from Suba. And from Suezca came cakes made with native tubers, a culinary innovation that the Fundación El Silbido de la Montaña has made through its research into food heritage. The day before as well, Rosita from El Charquito had taught everybody to make envueltos, which you can see on the right, boiled corn puddings wrapped in leaves, which were sweet and generous, just like her. There was much more on the table, served on raw terracotta dishes made with clay extracted from the Magdalena River basin, which the Bogotá flows into at the end of its course. Each person had a sheet of paper with 2 questions set before them on the table for when they had finished eating. What reflections and sensations did eating the Bogotá River bring to you? How did it feel to meet other people dedicated to the river? People shared that eating inspired them to reflect about, is one quote, abundance, the living territory, knowledge that comes from territory, life that sustains life, the world of possibilities that the river offers, and the relationship with it. How wonderful to eat the abundance of our beloved river. What a desire to continue growing food and being part of this. Thank you for so much love, for the hands that planted and prepared this food. It fills the heart. I find it incredible that so many different flavors, colors, shapes, and sensations of produce are generated around the river, wrote another, to be consumed by people committed to the cause of its recovery. So the Piquete stage, this performative act of eating the river, is a literal way to incorporate the watershed as a common concern and precious life support system. The vast table, long menu, ceremonial spirit and iconic backdrop made feasting the culinary register for eating that honoured this abundance while also amplifying the cognitive dissonance sparked by the idea of dining at precisely this incredibly polluted yet captivating point. We still remember what our friends in El Charquito said when we first told them about the plans for the Piquete. Diles que traigan pez capitán, tell them to bring capitán fish, referring to the endemic species that was once a staple food, but now, because of pollution, only survives very near the highland source. Spoken from this point that's the most contaminated on the river, they saw eating together as a way to be in metabolic relation with the whole river, and perhaps even conjuring a future when the Capitán might venture downstream again. This conjecturing of potential futures through food networks recalls Silvia Rivera Cosicanqui's appreciation of the English idiom food for thought. She celebrates what she calls, I quote her, the process of wonderful mental composting, activated when thought occurs at the confluences of practice, activism, and embodiment, a poetics of thinking that germinates action. So eating together energized that collective composting, emphasizing how action is conjugated more forcefully and joyfully in the plural than in the singular. Of course, our diners already knew this. In conversations around the table, Juanes Botello, a young organic gardener, reflected on the experience of eating together, saying this. This is one of the reasons why I started to advocate for native produce and change my diet. It makes me feel connected. It makes me feel part of the exploration of flavors, and here I am exploring them, delving into that vast culinary world. I thought it was a dream, being able to share such an ample and generous meal you prepared. It feels very special, very fraternal. At the end of the meal, Carlos Cuervo, who was one of our hosts at the Tequendama Falls, echoed this thought, toasting how, starting from today, we'll begin to tell the common story. Today marks the first day of this new history of all the stories that have not yet been told. Eating the river was an ephemeral act, but it was also a seed for us to identify commonalities in the stories that the people were gathered and find a more digested form to disseminate them. The Piquete sparked the sharing of stories of care and slow hope practiced in river stewardship, as well as the frustration and anger caused by the forces that perpetuate the river's slow death. These conversations showed that hydrocommoning demands significant physical, eco-political and affective labour. Small-scale initiatives alone will not decontaminate the river, but their work is fundamental to creating the metabolic literacies that might inspire others to call for its restoration. This was the idea at the heart of the publication and exhibition, Piquete del Río, that we also made in collaboration with Carlos and Cristina after the Piquete. That publication gave us an excuse to keep visiting and gathering our collaborators and to share their recipes in other formats with other publics. By assembling these stories and actions, Piquete del Río mapped what Dimitri Papadopoulos in experimental practice calls a more than social movement. That is, communities that serve as generous infrastructures to make better material conditions of existence through the process of commoning. Eating enabled us to connect individual collectives in a hydrocommoning network, and disseminating these stories it seeded connections to many, many more collectives and projects. So this brings me to where we are now, and continuing to develop communal eating as a curatorial form to gather more people with the river as a common cause. The Convites del Río are 4 culinary gatherings, each at a different point in the watershed, where we partner with specific collectives, working with them to develop a menu of dishes and an agenda of questions that they want to address in conversation with other actors. Eating together fosters solidarity, but it also offers a hospitable and convivial setting for generating uncomfortable conversations across political divides. A concern that's emerged as we consider, as an arts-led project, how we might do more than focus on care, but also contribute to bridging grassroots and institutional actors who coexist in tension and often outright dispute. Our method is to print these questions that they set onto tablecloths to make and serve the food with them and facilitate and record conversations, while encouraging people to record their thoughts on the table. The dishes are developed with the collectives, using produce from their community gardens and integrating their recipes. As in the Piquete, eating involves a longer metabolic cycle, which spans tilling, growing, harvesting, cooking, and eating. That the food in these meals comes from community gardens amplifies that everyday actions are those required to sustain the commons. And eating at the Convites also has this performative dimension in the staging of these events at public parks and in schools. So right now, literally this week, we have been digesting the recorded and transcribed conversations that took place during the first 3 encounters, one in the wetlands, Los Humedales, another in El Charquito, and another in Mhuysca. And as I mentioned, the final one takes place on Saturday in Bogotá. So in this process of listening again to the conversations and thinking through the transcripts, it's clear that they're proving a means to continue expanding the connections between different initiatives, organizations, and institutions, and to capture disputes and tensions that the lived experience and practices of hydrocommoning entail. From the transcripts we're editing come impassioned complaints about the failures of public policies to clean up the river, the way that politicians pretend to take grassroots actors into account, but really quite often just come along to take the ceremonial photo and disappear again, and the way that urban growth continues to destroy biological corridors, pressuring the wetlands with expanded highways and housing projects. For some people in these conversations, the answer is to work in partnership with institutions and private entities. For others, radical autonomy is the only way forward. We're working to honour that internal dissensus between different actors as we harvest parts of the conversation to include alongside recipes and texts by our partner collectives in an upcoming publication which we've called How to Return to the River, Como Volver al Río. So I started this talk by telling you that the work I would share today is this in-progress chapter of the book that I'm writing that traces hydrocommoning through practices of being, moving, weaving, recirculating, listening and eating in art and curatorial projects. My central move in that research is to shift our focus from thinking the hydrocommons as a thing, a common pool resource, to thinking hydrocommoning as a verb, a series of experiential practices aligned to an ethics of interdependence. This move follows a shift in literature on the commons that attends to it as an active living process. The definition of commoning as the unfolding creation of an organic fabric of social structures and processes puts the focus on what types of collaboration move us towards shared goals. It also underlines that the endurance and resilience of any commons relies on a deeper level of commoning, nourished by specific practices, values, rituals, traditions, and experiences that generate meaning and identity. This is precisely what I think art can do, especially when working in coalition with activist platforms. Thinking of these considerations introduces also an empirical dimension into eco-critical inquiry and curatorial practice. It means asking, how are people imagining and sustaining the hydrocommons? How can art support that? What mindsets and paradigms are actually shifting through aesthetic practices? So to sum up and answer some of the questions I posed, eating the Bogotá River is a mode of hydrocommoning because it draws us into conscious metabolic relation and makes it impossible not to think about pollution and the possibility of regeneration. Commensality, eating together, also raises pertinent questions about community, about who the we that gathers is and what ties bond us. As Heather Paxson writes in Eating Beyond Ourselves, acts of eating create webs of relation that encompass many ingestions and transcorporealities. These include the water and chemicals that flow into food, the microbes dining in our guts, through to the norms and technologies that shape food production, and the health of the ecosystems where this takes place. We've seen how this experience inspires reflection on what conditions enable the healthy reproduction of life, and what factors and actors jeopardize it. Also, staging acts of eating along the river that we document and circulate through social media and platforms is a way of intervening in the collective imaginary that people have of the river, the normalized slow death, and the hubris of titanic infrastructure that I talked about earlier. As one of the diners at the convite we held in Tibaúyes said, in the best Colombian slang, pensar en ir al río a ver el río suena como un plan paila. Going to the river just seems lame. This is what people think. But the images that we circulate show this is not so, and that the river is certainly neither lame nor dead. And the editorial work that digests these experiences means that eating as an ephemeral form can have an afterlife that circulates among other audiences to address questions of what forms of political organisation and actions are needed to restore the river to dignity, what type of water culture will support that. So responding to the questions how to care for a river and how to return to it, these publications emphasize the actions of hydrocommoning as situated in careful ways of sustaining community. They are these channels to disseminate these practices more widely, to normalize them, hopefully, as counter-practices to contamination and disconnection. Curatorial practice itself does not do the tangible labour of river care, the hard work of reforestation and aqueduct management, for instance, but it can play a valuable role in supporting and advocating for hydrocommoning. Ultimately, this is the potential we see in staging acts of eating in a polluted watershed. And to close then, and in the spirit of how you might also return to bodies of water that matter to you, and perhaps you haven't visited in a while, I want to share some of the actions that we've been compiling this week from the conversations that we've been listening to again that have happened between mouthfuls of empanadas, tamales, arepas over the last few months. Find places to access the river, walk with the river in wetlands, listen to water, organise clean-up days, create community gardens and dance around the composting piles, do citizen science, analysing water and air quality, counting pollinators and plants, offer community education when nature's the teacher, remember who we are and who has lived on these lands, unite by organising, move, change and transform ourselves like rivers do every day, smile at the river, give thanks to it. Thank you.